There is a creature that has never existed and has never been absent from the human imagination. It appears in the oldest written texts the human race has produced. The clay tablets of ancient Sumer, pressed with reed styluses by scribes who lived 4,000 years before the birth of Christ, who described a vast-scaled beast rising from the primordial waters before the world had its current shape. It appears in the Vedic hymns of ancient India, chanted in a language so old that its closest living relative is the speech of Persian shepherds who never heard of India. It appears on the walls of Egyptian temples, carved in relief by craftsmen who had never met a Sumerian and never would. It appears in the myths of the Han dynasty, the legends of the Norse, the sacred stories of the Aztec and the Maya and the Inca, the oral traditions of Aboriginal Australians who have been telling their stories continuously for 60,000 years, and the dreams of modern children who have never read a mythology text in their lives. The creature has wings, or it does not need them. It is scaled always with the cold iridescence of something that belongs to the earth and the water, and the ancient dark beneath both. It breathes fire, or it commands the rain, or it swallows the sun each night and must be persuaded to release it each morning. It guards thresholds, the gate between the living world and whatever lies beneath it, the passage between this age and the age before, the boundary between what is known and what should not be approached. It is enormous in a way that the word enormous fails to capture. Not large as a whale is large, or as an elephant is large. Large in the way that weather is large. Large in the way that the ocean is large. Large in the sense that its presence reorganizes the scale of everything around it and reduces the architecture of human civilization to something small and temporary and fragile. And it is ancient, not old in the way that mountains are old, though that would be old enough. Ancient in the way that the dark is ancient, older than light, older than form, older than the particular arrangement of matter that currently constitutes the world. Every culture that has ever told the story of this creature has insisted on this point above all others. The creature was here before us. It was here before the gods. It was here before the world had the shape it currently wears. Whatever else is uncertain about it, the antiquity is not. The creature predates everything. And everything that exists now exists in the shadow of what it was. This creature is the dragon, and the question that has occupied scholars and scientists and mythologists and folklorists and evolutionary biologists and neurologists and paleontologists for 2 centuries, the question that has generated more academic papers, more popular books, more heated interdisciplinary arguments than almost any other question in the history of comparative mythology, is not whether the dragon is real. It is how real it is, and in what sense, and through what mechanisms the same impossible animal managed to appear independently in every corner of the planet, without a single point of origin, without a single moment of cultural transmission, without a single moment of cultural transmission, without a single trade route or sailing ship or translated text to carry it from one civilization to the next. The answer is not simple. It is in fact several answers layered on top of each other, each one true, each one incomplete without the others, each one pointing to a different dimension of what the human species actually is and what it carries inside it that it does not know it carries. The dragon is a fossil story. It is a living animal story. It is a geological story. It is a neurological story. It is an evolutionary story stretching back 55 million years to small primates crouching in the branches of Eocene forests, listening for the sound of something moving through the leaves below. And it is a memory, the oldest memory the human race possesses, preserved not in writing or in stone, but in the deepest architecture of the brain itself, in structures so ancient they predate language, predate culture, predate the particular species of great ape that eventually looked up at the sky, pointed at something vast and scaled and terrible, and gave it a name. To understand what the dragon is, it is necessary first to understand how far it reaches, to trace its geography across the surface of the planet with the care of a cartographer who suspects that the distribution itself is the message. The European tradition is the one most familiar to the Western world, and so it is the logical starting point. though it should be understood from the outset that the European dragon is only one dialect of a story told in hundreds of languages, simultaneously across the whole of human civilization. In Europe, the dragon is a monster. That word carries specific weight, not merely a dangerous animal, not merely a predator operating outside human control, but a thing that is wrong in the way that certain things are wrong, structurally, cosmologically, in a manner that goes beyond the merely physical and touches something older. The European dragon breathes fire. Its scales are impenetrable by any weapon not specifically consecrated for the purpose. Its gaze can kill or petrify or enchant, depending on the tradition. It guards gold, always accumulated in vast underground hoards that the creature has spent centuries amassing for reasons that no one has ever satisfactorily explained. Because the dragon has no economy, no use for wealth, no descendants to inherit it. The gold simply accumulates, and the dragon sleeps on top of it, and the sleeping is the point. The oldest surviving reference to a European dragon is not the Christian dragon of St. George, not the fire drake of Beowulf, not the Fafnir of the Volsunga saga. The oldest surviving reference is from ancient Greece, where the word draken simply meant a large serpent, a creature of formidable size and formidable intelligence, capable of hypnotizing prey with its gaze, capable of constricting with a force that could crack stone. The Ledon of Greek mythology coiled around the tree that bore the golden apples of the Hesperides and never slept, a guardian so absolute that the only way past it was through trickery or divine intervention. Python guarded the oracle at Delphi until Apollo killed it, and the body of the dead dragon gave the oracle its name, Pythia. The Lernaean Hydra grew 2 heads for every one that Heracles removed, a biological horror that encodes in its structure a precise and practical warning. Some dangers cannot be defeated by direct confrontation. They must be outthought. In Norse mythology, the dragon tradition reaches a different register of scale. Jormungandr, the Midgard serpent, child of Loki, sibling to the wolf Fenrir and the death goddess Hel, is so enormous that it encircles the entire world at the bottom of the ocean and bites its own tail in an unbroken loop. Its very existence is a cosmological fact rather than a biological one. The earthquakes that ancient Scandinavians felt in their long winters were understood as the stirring of Jormungandr in the deep water, the creature shifting its coils, adjusting its grip on the world. At Ragnarok, the end of all things, Jormungandr will release its tail and rise from the sea. Thor will kill it, but the venom will kill Thor in turn, and the god will take 9 steps before falling. The death of the dragon and the death of the thunder god will be simultaneous. The end of the monster and the end of the protector will arrive at the same moment because they are, in some sense, the same thing. Fafnir is a different kind of Norse dragon, not cosmological but personal. Originally a dwarf, driven to murder his own father by the corruption of cursed gold, Fafnir transforms into a dragon not through any external magic, but through the simple weight of his own greed, his own hoarding, his own retreat from the world into the darkness of a cave with his treasure. The dragon, in this telling, is not a creature that exists separately from humanity. The dragon is what a human being becomes when it chooses accumulation over relationship, when it takes the gold, the thing of value, and lies down on top of it in the dark rather than putting it into the world where it can do something. Fafnir is slain by the hero, Sigurd, who then tastes the dragon's blood and gains the ability to understand the speech of birds. The knowledge inside the dragon, the old terrible knowledge, the knowledge that comes from spending years in the dark with your treasure, is transmissible. The dragon contains something worth taking, even after death. Cross the North Sea, and the dragon appears in the British tradition with the same insistence. The Red Dragon of Wales is ancient enough to precede the Norman conquest, ancient enough to precede the Anglo-Saxon settlement of Britain, traced in legend to a battle between a red dragon and a white one buried in the foundations of a fortress built by the legendary king Vortigern. The 2 dragons fighting underground caused the foundations to crack and the walls to fall. and only when they were released could the fort be built on solid ground. The dragon at the foundation. The dragon is the reason why nothing stable can be built until you have acknowledged what is buried beneath it. The Welsh dragon persists on the national flag today. The red dragon on its green and white field, one of the oldest national symbols in Europe. A creature out of the deepest pre-Christian mythology, still flying over a 21st century parliament. Now leave Europe entirely and travel east, because the European tradition, vivid and extensive as it is, represents only a fragment of the total picture. In China, the dragon, the lung, in older transliterations, the long in modern Mandarin, is something that shares enough features with the European model to be clearly related in some structural sense, and diverges enough to make the relationship philosophically interesting. The Chinese dragon does not breathe fire. It is not a monster. It is not something to be killed by a hero demonstrating his worthiness. The Chinese dragon is divine. It is benevolent, or it can be, when properly respected. It controls water, rain, rivers, floods, the sea itself. Emperors of China, from the earliest dynasties to the last, claim descent from the dragon throne, the dragon robe, the dragon seal. The entire apparatus of Chinese imperial power was dragon-coded, because the dragon was not the enemy of civilization, it was the source of civilization. The rain that the dragon sent was the rain that grew the rice that fed the people that built the empire. The Chinese dragon is agricultural divinity wearing scales, and yet, the Chinese dragon is still enormous, still scaled, still ancient beyond the reckoning of human calendars, still possessed of power that makes the largest human institution look temporary. The imperial dragon has 5 claws. Regular dragons have 4, and the use of a 5-clawed dragon by anyone other than the emperor was a capital offense. The dragon hierarchy in Chinese mythology is elaborate and precise. Celestial dragons who guard the heavens, spiritual dragons who send the rain, earth dragons who control the rivers, underground dragons who guard treasure. Every type of water, every type of earth, every type of sky has its dragon. The world is not merely watched over by dragons. The world is organized by them. In Japan, the tradition was largely absorbed from China through centuries of cultural exchange. But the Japanese rue carries its own specific weight. The Japanese dragon is more serpentine than the Chinese model, more associated with the sea and the storms that roll in from it. Ryujin, the dragon king of the sea, lives in an underwater palace and controls the tides with magical jewels. Yamata no Orochi, the 8-headed serpent dragon of Japanese mythology, is a creature of pure destructive appetite, requiring the sacrifice of a young woman each year until the hero Susanoo gets it drunk on rice wine and kills it while it sleeps. Inside its tail, Susanoo finds a divine sword, the Kusanagi, one of the 3 imperial treasures of Japan, still allegedly held at the Yatsuta Shrine in Nagoya, and still treated as a sacred object of the Japanese state. The dragon guarding the sword. The treasure inside the dragon, the oldest story in the world wearing the clothes of a specific culture. Move south and west from Japan into the Indian subcontinent, and the dragon tradition deepens and proliferates. The Naga, the great serpent beings of Hindu and Buddhist cosmology, are one of the most extensively documented categories of supernatural creature in the entire history of religion. They are not simple monsters. They are a civilization. They have kings and courts and underground palaces in the realm of Patala, the world beneath the world. They can take human form. They intermarry with humans. Some of the most important royal lineages in Indian history claimed Naga ancestry, and the cultural practice of Naga worship, the construction of sacred stones carved with serpent figures, offered flowers and milk at the base of sacred trees, continues across South and Southeast Asia to this day. The Naga is the dragon of the subcontinent, expressed through the specific theological framework of a culture that has always been more interested in relationship with power than in conquest of it. The European hero kills the dragon. The Indian tradition builds shrines to it, negotiates with it, marries into its lineage. The dragon is dangerous. There are plenty of Naga in Hindu mythology who are straightforwardly lethal. But the appropriate response to that danger is reverence and accommodation, not slaughter. Going further back into the Vedic tradition, the oldest layer of Indian religious thought, the dragon appears as Ritra, the great serpentine demon of drought, described in the Rig Veda as lying across the mountains like a sleeping serpent, blocking all the rivers, swallowing all the water in the world. The god Indra, wielder of the thunderbolt, must smash Ritra to release the waters and restore the rain. The storm god killing the great serpent to release the waters. This story is so widespread, so persistent across so many unconnected Indo-European and non-Indo-European traditions that mythologists have given it a technical name: the dragon-slaying myth, George and the dragon, Apollo and Python, Indra and Vritra, Thor and Jormungandr, Marduk and Tiamat, the storm god and the great serpent, over and over in every language that has ever had a word for either. And Tiamat brings us to Mesopotamia, to the oldest written literature in human history, and a dragon story so fundamental that it begins before the world itself does. The Enuma Elish is the Babylonian creation epic, inscribed on 7 clay tablets discovered in the ruins of the ancient library of Nineveh in the 19th century. It opens in the time before time, when nothing existed but 2 primordial beings, Apsu, the freshwater ocean, and Tiamat, the saltwater ocean. Tiamat is a dragon. The word the text uses, Tiamat, is cognate with the Hebrew Tehom, the deep, the formless waters over which the Spirit of God moved at the opening of the book of Genesis. The creation of the world in both traditions begins with the same thing, a vast watery darkness that is described in terms that cannot quite be separated from the concept of a living creature. In the Enuma Elish, the younger gods, the gods of the new order, kill Tiamat. The god Marduk splits her body in 2. From one half he makes the sky. From the other half he makes the earth. The oceans are her blood. The mountains are her bones. The world is built from the body of the dragon. Not symbolically, not metaphorically. Literally, in the cosmological framework of the civilization that produced this story, the most powerful civilization of the ancient Near East for 2,000 years. The physical substance of reality is the substance of reality, is the substance of a dragon that was killed before time began. Egypt contributes to the dragon archive in a different register, but with equal insistence. Apep, Apophis in the Greek rendering, is the great serpent of chaos, the enemy of Ra and of all created order. It does not live in the world. It lives in the Duat, the Egyptian underworld, in the 12th hour of the night, through which the solar bark of Ra must travel each evening before sunrise can occur. Every night, the priests of Ra, and later the pharaoh himself, understood as the earthly embodiment of Ra, would perform rituals to help the sun god defeat Apep, burning images of the serpent, reciting its secret names, spitting on it symbolically. For 3,000 years of Egyptian civilization, every sunrise was understood as a victory won against a dragon in the dark. Every morning that the sun appeared was the proof that the dragon had been defeated again. The Norse, the Chinese, the Indian, the Mesopotamian, the Egyptian traditions together cover an enormous geographic and temporal range. But they share, at the deepest level, a single fact. They are all civilizations with writing, with trade routes, with at least the theoretical possibility of cultural exchange. The skeptic can always argue that the dragon spread through contact, through commerce, through the slow diffusion of stories along the Silk Road or the sea lanes of the ancient Mediterranean. That argument collapses entirely when we cross the oceans, in Mesoamerica, in the civilizations of the Aztec and the Maya and the Olmec before both of them. The dragon is not an import. It cannot be an import. The isolation of the Americas from the Old World is not a matter of dispute. For at least 12,000 years, possibly much longer, The peoples of the Western Hemisphere developed their civilizations without significant contact with Europe, Asia, Africa, or the Near East. And in those civilizations, the dragon was there from the beginning. Quetzalcoatl, feathered serpent, is one of the foundational deities of Mesoamerican religious thought. The name itself is a compound of Quetzal, the bird whose feathers were the most sacred material in the Aztec world, and Coatl, serpent, the feathered serpent, the serpent that flies. He is the god of the morning star, of wind, of learning, of the calendar, of civilization itself. He created human beings. In some versions, he descended to the underworld and gathered the bones of the dead from previous worlds and mixed them with his own blood to create the people of the present age. He is the dragon as civilizational architect, as the force that built the world humans inhabit, wearing feathers instead of scales because in this part of the planet, the sacred bird was the Quetzal and not the eagle. The Aztec Cipacli, the primordial sea monster from whose dismembered body the earth was formed, is Tiamat wearing different clothes in a different hemisphere, with no possible point of cultural contact between them. Two civilizations, separated by 12,000 years of isolation and the full width of the Atlantic Ocean, independently produce creation myths in which the world is built from the body of a dragon killed by the gods at the beginning of time. The parallel is so precise that early 20th century scholars, encountering it before the full weight of what it meant had sunk in, spent decades trying to find the trade route, the sailing ship, the hypothetical pre-Columbian contact that would explain the similarity. There was none. The similarity explains itself. The same story arose because the same mind, the human mind, everywhere, reaches for the same answer when it asks the same question. Among the indigenous peoples of North America, the dragon appears in forms adapted to the specific landscapes and ecological realities of the continent. The great horned serpent, the underwater panther, appears across dozens of distinct cultural traditions from the Great Lakes region to the Gulf Coast. It lives in the deep water. It controls the weather. It must be respected and propitiated. It can destroy without warning. It is so ancient that the other animals defer to it. The Piesa bird of the Illini people, depicted in enormous paintings on the limestone cliffs above the Mississippi River, images so large and so striking that the French explorer Jacques Marquette described them in his journals in 1673 with visible astonishment, combined the features of a deer, a fish, a man, and a predatory bird into a single creature that had been terrorizing travelers on the river since before anyone living could remember. The thunderbird of the Pacific Northwest traditions carries the storm on its wings. The horned serpent of the Pueblo traditions lives in the springs and rivers and controls the rain without which the desert cannot be farmed. In South America, the Amaru of Andean mythology is the two-headed serpent that connects the three worlds, the upper world of the sky, the middle world of human habitation, and the lower world of the dead and the deep earth. It is a cosmic axis, a biological bridge between the living and the dead, between the above and the below. The anaconda in the Amazon basin is not merely a large snake in the mythological frameworks of the peoples who live alongside it. It is the primordial serpent, the one that was there before the river had its current course, the one that, when it moves, reshapes the landscape. And then there is Australia, which changes the picture entirely. The Aboriginal peoples of Australia arrived on the continent at least 65,000 years ago. Their cultural traditions, their stories, their sacred knowledge, their understanding of the relationship between the living world and the spiritual world have been transmitted unbroken across that entire span. 65,000 years of continuous oral tradition is not a metaphor. It is the longest unbroken cultural record in the history of the human species, longer than agriculture, longer than writing, longer than the existence of every other civilization on the planet combined. And at the center of that tradition is the rainbow serpent. The rainbow serpent is not a small or peripheral figure in Aboriginal cosmology. It is one of the most important spiritual beings in existence. It was present during the Dreamtime, the primordial era in which the landscape of Australia was shaped in which the rivers found their courses, in which the waterholes were created, in which the sacred sites were established. The rainbow serpent moved across the country, and its body carved the riverbeds. Where it rested, the waterholes formed. Where it raised its head, the hills rose. It is, in the most precise possible sense, the geological history of the Australian landscape, given a body and a name. The rainbow serpent is vast, it is ancient, it is serpentine, it creates and destroys. It must be respected absolutely. To disturb a sacred waterhole, to violate the protocols around a rainbow serpent site, is not merely a social transgression. It is an invitation to destruction on a scale that no individual, human or community can survive. The rainbow serpent is a dragon, the oldest dragon in the world. A dragon whose story has been told continuously for 65,000 years by people who had no contact with Babylon, no contact with China, no contact with Greece, no contact with Mesoamerica, no contact with any of the other traditions that independently produce the same story. The coincidence argument does not survive the rainbow serpent. Having traced the dragon across its full geographic range, it is now possible to look at the shape that remains constant across every variation, every cultural adaptation, every theological reframing. There are 6 features that appear in virtually every dragon tradition in the world, with a consistency that is not explainable by coincidence and not explainable by cultural diffusion. The first is scale. The dragon is always enormous. Not large in the way that a large animal is large, not elephant large, not whale large, not the large of anything that currently walks the surface of the planet. The dragon's size is categorical rather than quantitative. It is not that the dragon is a very big lizard, it is that the dragon represents the category of size that exists above the category occupied by the largest things the viewer has ever seen. Whatever the viewer's largest reference point is, the dragon is larger. Whatever the viewer understands as the maximum possible size of a living creature, the dragon exceeds it. The scale of the dragon is not a description of a physical measurement. It is a statement about the relationship between human beings and the forces they cannot control. The second is the serpentine body. Dragons are derived from snakes. This is not a controversial claim in comparative mythology. The scaled body, the sinuous movement, the cold and patient intelligence behind the eyes. The snake is the template on which the dragon is built, in every tradition, everywhere. Even when the dragon has legs, even when it has wings, even when it has multiple heads or a body that combines features from multiple animals. The serpentine core is present. The dragon moves the way a snake moves, not with the mechanical predictability of a 4-legged animal, but with a fluid, purposeful, somehow wrong quality that no other animal movement shares. The snake is the first predator. It is the predator that our primate ancestors feared before they were capable of fearing anything consciously. The dragon inherits that ancient terror and magnifies it beyond the scale of any actual snake. The third is elemental power. The European dragon breathes fire. The Chinese dragon controls rain. The Norse Jormungandr causes earthquakes. The Vedic Ritra swallowed all the water in the world. The Aboriginal rainbow serpent carved the rivers and created the waterholes. In every tradition, the dragon is not merely associated with a force of nature. The dragon is the force of nature. The rain does not merely happen in the territory where the Chinese dragon lives. The Chinese dragon is what the rain is, expressed in biological form. The earthquake is not something that disturbs the Norse sea serpent. The Norse sea serpent is what the earthquake is, translated into mythology. The dragon is the living embodiment of the most dangerous and uncontrollable natural forces the relevant culture had to manage. Which forces those were: fire, flood, storm, earthquake, varied by geography, by what the local environment actually threatened. But the role of the dragon in relation to those forces was constant. The dragon was not a creature that caused them. The dragon was what they were. The fourth feature is antiquity. Every dragon tradition insists on the same point. The creature was here before everything else. Before the gods in some traditions. Before the world itself in others. The Babylonian Tiamat predates creation. She is what exists before the world is formed, and the world is formed from her body. The Aboriginal rainbow serpent was present in the Dreamtime, before the landscape of Australia had its current shape. Even the European dragon, the most localized and least cosmological of the major traditions, is always described as ancient beyond memory. It has been in the cave for centuries. It has been accumulating gold since before the oldest man alive was born. The antiquity is not incidental, it is the source of the dragon's power. The dragon has been here longer than anything else. It has outlasted everything that has tried to survive in the same space, whatever it is. It has proven its right to existence by the simple fact of still existing after everything else has come and gone. The fifth feature is the guard function. Dragons guard things. This is so consistent across traditions that it almost constitutes a definition. A dragon is a creature that guards a threshold. The Greek Ladon guarded the golden apples. The Norse Nidhogg guards the roots of the world tree. The Babylonian dragon guards the gate of the underworld. The Chinese dragon guards the rivers and the rain, and therefore the rice, and therefore civilization. The underground dragon guards treasure. The dragons of countless traditions guard the boundaries between the living world and whatever lies beyond it, the underworld, the afterlife, the realm of the gods, the deep ocean, the place before time. The dragon is not a wandering predator. It occupies a specific position at a specific threshold, and the threshold cannot be crossed without confronting it. The monster at the door is not incidentally a dragon. The monster at the door is always a dragon. The sixth feature is the connection to death, not merely danger, death specifically. The site of the Ninki Nunka, the great river dragon of West African tradition, is said to cause madness or death regardless of whether the creature takes any active hostile action. The mere encounter is lethal. The gaze of the basilisk, a European dragon variant, kills directly. The breath of the European fire-breathing dragon kills. The venom of the naga kills. Even the benevolent Chinese dragon, properly divine and properly revered, can drown provinces if offended. There is no dragon tradition in which the dragon is entirely safe. There is no dragon tradition in which the appropriate response to a dragon is complete indifference. Every dragon, in every tradition, represents the possibility of death in a form that cannot be outrun, cannot be appealed to on human terms, and cannot be controlled by any strategy available to an ordinary human being. 6 features: scale, serpentine form, elemental power, antiquity, the god function, the connection to death. Every dragon in every tradition shares most or all of these. The variations are cultural elaborations on a common structure. The structure itself does not vary, which means the structure comes from somewhere that culture does not reach. The first serious scientific attempt to explain the global dragon myth emerged not from anthropology or mythology, but from the ground itself, from the bones that ancient peoples found eroding out of cliffs and riverbeds and desert formations and brought home with them, tried to make sense of, and encoded in their stories. Adrienne Mayer is a folklorist and historian of science who spent decades at the intersection of classical studies and paleontology. Her 2000 book, The First Fossil Hunters, made an argument that had been gestured at before, but never assembled with the rigor and geographic specificity she brought to it. Ancient peoples were not passive observers of natural phenomena. They were careful, intelligent, empirically minded interpreters of physical evidence. When they found enormous bones in the ground, bones belonging to animals that no longer existed anywhere in the living world, bones too large to belong to any creature the finder had ever seen, they did not simply discard them or ignore them. They picked them up. They examined them. They tried to reconstruct what creature had left them behind, and then they told stories about what they had found. The stories they told were the myths that modern scholars have spent 2 centuries calling fantasy. The griffin, the lion-bodied, eagle-headed guardian of gold that appears in ancient Greek mythology and in the decorative art of cultures stretching from the Mediterranean to the Silk Road, is, in Mayer's analysis, directly traceable to the fossil beds of Central Asia. The Gobi Desert, which the ancient Scythians traversed regularly on their nomadic circuit through the trade routes connecting East Asia to the Mediterranean world, contains enormous deposits of Protoceratops fossils. Protoceratops was a dinosaur of the late Cretaceous period, a beaked herbivore roughly the size of a large dog, with 4 legs built for digging through hard substrates and a bony frill around the skull. In the Gobi Formation, Protoceratops fossils erode out of the sandstone in dramatic clusters, often associated with the same geological layers that contain alluvial gold deposits. The Scythians, encountering these fossils, the beak like an eagle, the 4 legs like a cat, the ground nesting habit, the association with gold-bearing geology, carried descriptions back to the Greek world. The Greeks, trying to reconstruct the animal from the description, arrived at the griffin. Maya traces the precise geographic overlap between the Protoceratops fossil range and the ancient trade routes where griffin mythology is densest, and the correlation is not approximate. It is exact. The griffin is not a dragon, strictly speaking, but the mechanism Maya identified, ancient peoples building mythological creatures around fossil evidence, is a dragon production mechanism, and she applies it across dozens of traditions with equal precision. Consider what a coastal community in the ancient Mediterranean would have made of a mosasaur skull eroding out of a cliff face. Mosasaurs were marine reptiles that dominated the world's oceans during the late Cretaceous, roughly 70 to 66 million years ago. The largest known species reached 17 meters in length. Their skulls alone could exceed a meter. Their jaw structure was unlike any modern reptiles. They possessed the secondary palate and a second set of teeth on the roof of the mouth, allowing them to grasp and swallow prey that no modern predator could manage. They were not sharks. They were not crocodiles. There was something that belonged to a different era of the world's history, something that had no living relatives of comparable scale, something that a finder in ancient times would have had no adequate framework for, and therefore would have been obliged to invent one. The sea serpent, the Leviathan, the creature that lives in the deep ocean and is so vast that ships disappear without explanation. The monster at the boundary of the known sea, where the maps end and the cartographers wrote their honest confession. Here be dragons. In China, the connection between fossil bones and dragon mythology is not a matter of scholarly reconstruction. It is a matter of historical record. The Chinese term for fossils, long ge, translates as dragon bones. For thousands of years, dragon bones were a standard item in the Chinese pharmacopoeia. They were prescribed for a range of ailments. Apothecaries throughout China stocked them. The supply chain that fed Chinese traditional medicine included an unknowable quantity of dinosaur fossils, ground to powder and dissolved in water and consumed as medicine because the fossils were not metaphorically dragon bones. They were literally understood to be the physical remains of the divine beings that governed the rivers and the rain. This was not a marginal or archaic belief. Farmers in Henan province, one of the richest dinosaur fossil beds in Asia, were still excavating fossils and selling them as dragon bones to traditional medicine dealers in the 20th century. The discovery of the enormous sauropod deposits in Henan, which would eventually be recognized as some of the most significant dinosaur fossil beds in the world, was initially delayed because the local population had been systematically selling the bones before paleontologists could study them. In the American Southwest, the Navajo and Pueblo peoples have extensive traditions involving the bones of enormous creatures found in the desert formations of the Colorado Plateau. The Colorado Plateau is, among other things, one of the premier dinosaur fossil localities on the planet. Dinosaur National Monument, the Morrison Formation, the deposits that yielded Brontosaurus and Stegosaurus and Allosaurus. The ancient peoples who lived in this landscape for thousands of years did not fail to notice these bones. They built stories around them, stories about great monsters from the previous world, creatures of the age before the current age, things so large and so powerful that even their bones, millions of years after their deaths, were objects of sacred significance. The fossil theory is powerful. It explains specific features of specific dragon myths in specific geographic locations with a precision that no alternative explanation matches. It explains why the Chinese dragon is so closely associated with the physical remains of large reptiles. It explains why griffin mythology clusters precisely where Protoceratops fossils are found. It explains why sea serpent traditions are densest along coasts, where marine reptile fossils erode from the cliffs with frequency. It explains why desert cultures produce different dragon variants than forest cultures or coastal cultures. Because the fossils in the desert are different from the fossils in the forest, and the stories built around them are correspondingly different. But the fossil theory has limits that its most enthusiastic proponents acknowledge. It explains some dragons in some places. It does not explain why cultures with no relevant fossil beds still produce dragon myths with all 6 of the consistent features. It does not explain why the Aboriginal rainbow serpent, whose tradition predates any systematic fossil hunting by tens of thousands of years, shares the same essential structure as the Babylonian Tiamat. It does not explain why the core features, the serpentine form, the antiquity, the connection to death, the guard function, persist across traditions that have no geological or fossil link. For those explanations, it is necessary to turn from the bones in the ground to the animals still breathing above it. Komodo Island sits in the Lesser Sunda Islands of Indonesia, in a stretch of ocean between Bali and Flores. It is not a large island. It is not famous for anything other than the thing that lives on it, and the thing that lives on it should not, by any intuitive assessment of the modern world, exist. The Komodo dragon, Varanus komodoensis, is the largest living lizard on the planet. Adult males regularly reach 3 meters in length. The largest reliably recorded individual measured 3.1 meters and weighed 166 kilograms. They move with a quality of attention that is difficult to describe without resorting to the vocabulary of myth, a patient, deliberate, cold intelligence that watches everything and hurries toward nothing, because nothing in the island ecosystem poses a meaningful threat to an adult Komodo dragon, and the Komodo dragon knows this in whatever way a reptile can be said to know anything. Their tongues are forked, flickering constantly, reading the chemical landscape of the air with an accuracy that makes vision seem crude by comparison. A Komodo dragon can detect the scent of a dead animal from 10 kilometers away. It can track a wounded animal for days across terrain that would defeat most mammalian predators. It is an ambush hunter. It can wait, entirely motionless, for hours, and then cover 4 meters in under a second when the moment arrives. The killing mechanism of the Komodo dragon has been the subject of significant scientific revision in the 21st century. For decades, the standard account held that the danger lay in the bacteria of the dragon's saliva, that the bite itself was merely the beginning of a slow biological dissolution, that the real predator was the infection rather than the animal. More recent research established that the Komodo dragon possesses venom glands that produce anticoagulants and shock-inducing compounds. The bite introduces the venom. The prey weakens. The dragon follows with the patience of something that has no concept of urgency and tracks the dying animal to wherever it falls. The dragon then eats the entire body. The jaw structure allows for a gape that has no analog in any modern predator, swallowing prey up to 80% of the dragon's own body weight in a single sitting. They can reproduce without males. In captivity, Komodo dragon females have produced viable offspring through parthenogenesis. A single female in an island environment with no male population can generate a new colony. They live for 30 years. They grow throughout their lives. No one has established a hard upper limit on the size that a Komodo dragon can reach, given sufficient food supply and sufficient time. A traveler in the Indonesian archipelago who encountered a Komodo dragon in the 16th century, in the era before the species was formally described by Western science, in the era before the rational framework existed to contain what they were seeing, would have returned home with a story about a vast, scaled, cold-eyed, venomous creature of ancient patience and lethal purpose. They would have been describing something real. The creature they were describing was, by any reasonable measure, a dragon. The Komodo dragon is the present. It exists today, and it generates dragon-adjacent responses in everyone who encounters it without prior knowledge of what it is. But the past contains creatures that make the Komodo dragon look like a starting point rather than an endpoint. Megalania, now formally designated Varanus priscus, was a giant monitor lizard that walked the Australian continent until approximately 40,000 years ago. The size estimates for Megalania have been revised multiple times as the fossil record has improved, and the current best estimates place its length at between 4 and 7 meters, with the most commonly cited figure being approximately 5 meters for a large adult. It was the largest terrestrial lizard known to have existed. It was almost certainly venomous, carrying the same venom gland architecture as its living relatives. It was an ambush predator that would have hunted the megafauna of Pleistocene Australia, diprotodons the size of modern rhinoceroses, giant wombats, kangaroos of species no longer living. 40,000 years ago, anatomically modern humans had been living in Australia for at least 25,000 years, possibly longer. The current archaeological consensus for the arrival of the first Australians is approximately 65,000 years ago. There is a period of overlap, the length of which is still being refined, but which is measured in thousands of years, during which the people who would eventually produce the rainbow serpent tradition lived in the same landscape as a 5 to 7 meter venomous ambush predator. The rainbow serpent, the ancient, vast, serpentine creator and reshaper of the Australian landscape, may carry the memory of Megalania, not as a direct portrait, but as the story that was built around the largest and most dangerous thing anyone had ever encountered in the Australian continent. A story that was told and retold and elaborated over 65,000 years of unbroken tradition until the specific animal was gone, but the category it occupied, the vast ancient serpentine destroyer creator, was permanent. In South America, Titanoboa ceruginoensis was a snake that lived approximately 60 million years ago in the tropical forests of what is now Colombia. Its fossils were discovered in 2009 in the Cerrejón coal mine and described in the journal Nature with a level of scientific excitement that was, by the standards of academic publishing, remarkable. Titanoboa reached lengths of approximately 13 meters and weighed over 1,000 kilograms. It was the largest snake that has ever existed. It would have been capable of hunting caiman, the South American relative of the crocodile, as prey. It would have been capable of crushing anything it chose to constrict. Titanoboa is too old, by 60 million years, to have been encountered by modern humans. But the anaconda is not. The green anaconda, Eunactes murinus, can reach 8 meters in length and weigh over 250 kilograms, making it the heaviest snake alive. It is an apex predator of the Amazon basin, capable of taking prey as large as deer and capybara and, on documented occasions, small caimans. It has no natural predators as an adult. It has been present in the Amazon basin for the entire span of human habitation of that region, and it has been woven into the mythological fabric of Amazonian cultures for the entire span of their existence. The anaconda is the primordial serpent of the Amazon, the one that was there when the world was young, the one whose movements shaped the rivers. The dragon of the tropical forest, wearing the body of the largest snake alive, rather than the body of a European fire breather, but recognizable as the same essential creature. In the skies, there is Argentavis magnificens, a giant teratorn of the South American Miocene dated to approximately 6 million years ago, with a wingspan that current estimates place at approximately 7 meters. 7 meters! The largest living flying bird, the wandering albatross, has a maximum wingspan of approximately 3.5 meters. Argentavis had twice that wingspan and weighed roughly 70 kilograms. It was almost certainly a soaring predator rather than an active pursuit hunter, using thermals the way modern condors do, but operating at a scale that made the condor look like a sparrow. Argentavis is too old to have been encountered by any human being, but the thunderbird, the great winged creature of North American tradition, and the paukai of Maori tradition, and the giant eagles of South American mythology gesture at something that was real. that was recent enough to have been encountered, that provided the template for the aerial predator that appears in the composite dragon. The Haast's eagle of New Zealand is the most precisely documented example of a real large predatory bird within the span of human memory. Hiraetus morai, reclassified more than once as the fossil record improved, had a wingspan of approximately 3 meters and weighed up to 15 kilograms. This does not sound large in absolute terms until you understand what it hunted: moa, flightless birds that stood up to 3 meters tall and weighed as much as 230 kilograms. The Haast's eagle killed moa by diving at speeds approaching 80 kilometers per hour and striking with talons that generated a gripping force comparable to a lion's bite. The impact alone was sufficient to kill or stun prey 20 times the eagle's body weight. The Maori people arrived in New Zealand approximately 800 years ago. They found an ecosystem that had never seen a human being, populated by megafauna that had evolved in the absence of any mammalian predator, and had no fear responses to large animals. The moa were easy to hunt and easy to drive to extinction. The Haast's eagle, which had co-evolved with the moa and required it as a prey base, disappeared within a century of Maori arrival, but it did not disappear before making an impression. The Maori tradition of the pokai, a great bird that could take a human child, is understood by ornithologists and anthropologists to be a direct cultural record of the Haast's eagle, a creature large enough and powerful enough and aggressive enough that it warranted a name and a tradition and a warning passed from generation to generation across 800 years of Maori culture. The memory of the eagle outlasted the eagle itself by centuries. This is the pattern. The living animal generates the encounter generates the story outlasts the animal. And over generations, the story, freed from the constraints of a specific animal in a specific place, becomes something larger and more general, accumulating features from other dangerous animals, other terrifying encounters, other landscapes, and other geological events, until the specific has become universal and the local has become the dragon that every culture recognizes and no living animal exactly resembles. Of all the features that define a dragon, fire is the most biologically anomalous. Scale is explicable. Vast size is documented in the fossil record. Flight is attested by the Haast's eagle and the terror it generated. The serpentine body is the body of the largest snakes that have ever lived. But fire, the directed exhalation of flame from within a living body, appears to have no real-world equivalent, no evolutionary precedent, no biological mechanism that any living organism has developed. The appearance, it turns out, is misleading. The bombardier beetle, any of the roughly 500 species comprising the tribe Bracconini, is a small insect found on every continent except Antarctica. When threatened, it produces a boiling chemical spray from its abdomen and ejects it at its attacker with an audible detonation. The mechanism is precise. The beetle's body contains 2 separate storage chambers, one containing hydrogen peroxide and hydroquinones, one containing water, and a mix of catalytic enzymes. When threatened, the beetle opens the valve between the chambers. The catalytic enzymes react with the hydrogen peroxide in a rapid exothermic reaction that brings the mixture to approximately 100 degrees Celsius, boiling in milliseconds. The boiling mixture is ejected through a directional nozzle at the tip of the abdomen with a force that can project it up to 30 centimeters and with a rapid pulsing action that produces the distinctive popping sound. The bombardier beetle breathes fire in every functional sense except the visual. It uses controlled internal chemical combustion as an offensive weapon. It is a flamethrower scaled to insect dimensions. The theoretical biology of a larger fire-producing mechanism has been explored with varying degrees of rigor. The underlying chemistry is not prohibitive. A large reptile with a digestive chemistry capable of producing significant quantities of hydrogen sulfide, a flammable gas that numerous organisms produce as a metabolic byproduct, combined with a calcite-based spark organ analogous to the mechanism by which flint produces sparks, combined with a muscular gland capable of storing and directing the gas, produces a functional fire-breathing mechanism. The engineering challenge is not the chemistry but the energetics. Producing enough gas to sustain directed combustion requires significant metabolic investment, and biology does not maintain expensive structures unless they provide survival advantages that justify the cost. For an animal already large enough to be an apex predator, an animal that already dominates its ecosystem by virtue of size, venom, and physical power, directed fire may simply be redundant. Biology builds what survival requires. If the Komodo dragon already kills everything in its environment through size, venom, and ambush, there is no selective pressure toward the development of fire. The fire-producing mechanism would require calories that are better spent growing larger. The geological contribution to the fire tradition is more immediately documentable. Natural gas seeps. Locations where methane and other flammable hydrocarbons percolate through porous rock and emerge at the surface exist across the world and have been burning continuously, ignited by lightning or volcanic activity for thousands of years in some locations. The most famous is the Chimera of Lycia on the slopes of Mount Olympos in what is now southern Turkey, where natural gas seeps have sustained a fire that has been burning since at least antiquity. Homer describes it. The Lycian people built a temple there. The Lycian king Bellerophon, in the myth, was sent to kill the Chimera, the fire-breathing monster, and the geographic correspondence between the myth and the burning hillside is not coincidental. The fire that comes from the earth, with no visible fuel source, burning from ancient times, with no human maintenance, in a landscape where the rock itself seems to breathe flame. This is the geological substrate of the fire-breathing dragon in the volcanic and seismically active regions, where such features were most visible to ancient populations. The Mediterranean basin, the Ring of Fire, the volcanic archipelagos of the Pacific, the rift zones of East Africa, wherever the earth burns without visible reason, the cultural tradition of the dragon that breathes fire from within is densest. The fire, then, is assembled from real sources. The bombardier beetle provides the biological proof of concept. The natural gas seep provides the visible geological model. The volcanic landscape provides the scale. None of these requires a large fire-breathing reptile. All of them provide raw material, real observations of real phenomena. That, assembled into a story about a vast-scaled ancient creature, produce exactly the dragon that every culture knows. In 1977, Carl Sagan, the astronomer, the science communicator, the man who spent his career trying to understand the place of the human species in the cosmos, published a book called The Dragons of Eden. It won the Pulitzer Prize for General Nonfiction. It was not a book about paleontology or comparative mythology. It was a book about the human brain, and specifically about the parts of the human brain that are older than humanity. Sagan's central observation was this: the three creatures that appear most consistently as monsters in human mythology, the great serpent, the great cat, and the large bird of prey, are precisely the three categories of predator that pose the greatest threat to the evolutionary ancestors of human beings across the broadest span of evolutionary time. The argument requires understanding what a human being is before it was a human being. The genus Homo has existed for approximately 2 million years. The species Homo sapiens has existed for approximately 300,000 years. But the evolutionary lineage that produced Homo sapiens extends back 55 million years to the earliest primates of the Eocene epoch, small, tree-dwelling, insectivorous mammals that looked nothing like a modern human being, but whose basic neurological architecture, including the fear processing systems of the limbic brain, are still present in every human skull alive today. For 55 million years, the ancestors of human beings were not apex predators. They were prey, small arboreal prey, operating in an ecosystem that contained three categories of predator specialized to kill them. The first was the large constrictor. Pythons and their relatives were, in the Eocene forests of the Old World tropics, formidable predators of small primates. They moved through the canopy with a silence that no other predator matched. They were virtually invisible against bark and branch, their coloration and pattern an evolutionary solution to the problem of being seen before striking. They had no tell, no footstep, no breath, no shadow, that reliably preceded their attack. The strike was the first evidence of the predator's presence, and then the coils tightened. The snake was the death that was already there before the prey knew death had arrived. The fear of snakes that is coded into primate neurology is the longest-running fear in vertebrate evolutionary history. The second was the large fillid, the ancestral big cats, the evolutionary lineage that would eventually produce the leopard, the lion, the jaguar, were ground-based and lower-tree predators that hunted primate prey with a combination of power, speed, and patient stalking strategy that made them a persistent existential threat to early hominid populations. The leopard, specifically, is a primate predator of particular historical significance. It is agile enough to pursue prey into the tree canopy, strong enough to carry a kill twice its own body weight into the branches to keep it from scavengers, and strategic enough to cache prey for later consumption. Leopard-killed hominid skulls appear in the fossil record at multiple sites in South Africa, establishing beyond dispute that early human ancestors were leopard prey. The fear of large cats that is present in human neurology is not a learned response. It is structural. It is ancient in the way that the bones are ancient. The third was the large raptor. The eagles and hawks and falcons that preyed on early primates represent a different category of threat. Not the patient constriction of the snake, not the ground-based pursuit of the fillid, but the vertical strike, the attack that comes from above with no warning and no possibility of defense, the death that falls from the sky. Harpy eagles are documented predators of monkeys and sloths in the Amazon basin today. The crowned eagle of sub-Saharan Africa, which can take prey up to 40 kilograms, is documented preying on juvenile primates. The evolutionary pressure toward fear of aerial predators in the primate line is as ancient as the evolutionary pressure toward fear of snakes and large cats. 3 predators, 3 directions of approach, 3 categories of death, from within the foliage, from the ground, from the sky, and 55 million years of evolutionary time, during which the primates that failed to respond appropriately to any of these 3 threats died, and the primates that had faster, more accurate, more hair-trigger responses to these threats survived and reproduced. The result, Sagan argued, is a human brain that contains innate, non-learned fear responses to the specific stimulus patterns associated with each of these 3 predators. The sinuous movement of a long-scaled body, the crouching power of a large quadruped with retractable claws, the shadow of wings against the sky. These stimuli do not need to be taught. They do not need to be experienced. The response is already there, written into the architecture of the amygdala and the limbic system by tens of millions of years of natural selection. The dragon, in Sagan's analysis, is the composite creature assembled from this deep evolutionary template. The serpentine body of the python, the power and the claws of the great cat, the wings and the aerial approach of the raptor. The dragon is what you get when the primate brain constructs a maximally threatening predator from its 3 deepest, oldest, most hardwired fear templates. The answer, always, everywhere, is a dragon. This hypothesis has been substantially refined and supported by subsequent neuroscience. Joseph Ledoux's work on the amygdala, the almond-shaped structure deep in the temporal lobe that is the brain's primary fear processing center, established that certain fear responses in humans are not the product of learning or cultural transmission. They are structural. They are present from birth. The amygdala responds to snake-like shapes with a speed and intensity that bypasses the cortical processing that mediates learned fears. The snake fear response is faster than conscious perception. It is faster than the capacity to form a deliberate thought. It operates below the level of culture, below the level of language, in the most ancient layers of the brain's architecture. Studies with infant primates, both human infants and the infants of non-human primates, consistently show heightened vigilance and distress responses to snake-like shapes, to large animal silhouettes, and to sudden movement from above, before any learning experience could have generated those responses. The fear is pre-cultural. It is pre-linguistic. It is pre-individual. It belongs to the species, not to any person within it. Anthropologist David Jones extended Sagan's hypothesis in his 2000 book, An Instinct for Dragons, proposing that the dragon is not merely a composite of three predator categories, but is specifically the image that the human nervous system generates when all three ancient predator fear systems are simultaneously activated. The snake, the great cat, the aerial predator. When the human brain is presented, by real animals, by fossil evidence, by geological spectacle, by extreme environmental stress, with stimuli that trigger all three simultaneously, the internal image generated is a dragon. Jones called this a hallucination of maximum danger. The word hallucination here should not be understood in its colloquial sense. In the technical neuroscientific sense, a hallucination is simply a perception generated by the brain's internal processes rather than received from external sensory input. The brain, under conditions of extreme threat, or under conditions that pattern match to its deep templates for extreme threat, generates an internal image of the maximally dangerous predator. It does this because having a vivid and unforgettable mental representation of the worst possible predator is evolutionarily adaptive. It prepares the organism. It sharpens the response. That internal image is a dragon. This explains what no other theory explains fully. It explains why cultures with no fossil beds still produce dragon myths. It explains why cultures with no Komodo dragons, no megalania, no natural gas seeps, no giant eagles still produce dragon myths. It explains why the dragon appears in the art of cultures that had no contact with any other dragon-producing culture. It explains why the dragon appears in the dreams of modern humans living in cities, surrounded by no predators of any kind, operating in an environment so thoroughly controlled that the statistical probability of being killed by an animal is vanishingly small. The dragon appears everywhere because the dragon is inside every human brain. It was put there before language existed, before culture existed, before the particular arrangement of genes that constitutes the human species existed. It was put there by 55 million years of being hunted by things that were fast and cold and patient, and came from directions that no defensive strategy adequately covered. Every human being alive carries the dragon inside them, encoded in the most ancient architecture of the limbic system, waiting for the right combination of stimuli to bring it into consciousness. The fossil theory is true. The living animal theory is true. The geological theory is true. The neurological theory is true. The error that any single cause explanation makes is treating these as competing hypotheses, as though the dragon can only have one origin. The dragon does not have one origin. The dragon has every origin simultaneously. It is the point at which all of these influences converge, the shape that reality takes when it has accumulated enough layers of real danger to require a single form that can hold all of them. The convergence works like this. The human brain contains, from before the dawn of the species, a template for the maximally dangerous predator. The template is built from the three predator categories that shaped primate evolution across 55 million years: the great serpent, the great cat, the aerial predator. This template is the foundation, the neurological bedrock on which everything else is built. It ensures that the dragon, when it appears, will always be recognized. It ensures that the specific cultural elaborations that different civilizations add to the template will always be legible to members of other civilizations, because the template itself is universal. On top of this neurological foundation, real encounters with real animals add specificity and urgency. The population living alongside Megalania and Pleistocene Australia encounters the template-made flesh, a real animal that activates all three ancient fear responses simultaneously, a real animal that validates the internal image. The story told about this encounter is not invented from nothing. It is the description of a real experience, shaped by the neurological template that pre-existed the experience and prepared the people for it. The encounter gives the template a body. The body survives in story long after the animal that provided it is gone. Real fossil evidence adds another layer. the Scythian traders finding Protoceratops skulls in the Gobi Desert, the Chinese farmers excavating sauropod femurs from Henan riverbeds, the coastal communities of the ancient Mediterranean watching mosasaur skulls emerge from eroding cliffs. Each of these encounters provides physical, tangible, holdable evidence for the existence of vast creatures that no one alive has seen. The evidence confirms the template. It gives the internal image an empirical foundation, not just a feeling, not just a nightmare, but bones. Real bones. The bones of something that was here. Geological spectacle adds the elemental dimension. The hillside in Lycia that has burned continuously since antiquity. The volcanic eruptions that shake the ground and fill the sky with fire and ash. The earthquakes that split the earth and swallow cities. The tsunamis that arrive from the open sea without warning and recede, leaving bodies in the branches of trees. These are not dragon encounters, but they are processed through the dragon template, the ancient neural structure that links vast, uncontrollable power to the composite predator. The fire that comes from the earth becomes the breath of the creature beneath the earth. The earthquake becomes the stirring of the serpent that encircles the world. The flood becomes the anger of the vast serpentine deity that controls the water. Geology and biology fuse in the mythological framework because both are processed through the same fear architecture and both produce the same image. Cultural transmission extends the reach of the tradition beyond the specific ecosystems and geological features that generated it locally. A story about a vast serpentine creature, developed in Australia around the memory of Megalania, does not stay in Australia. The human species migrates. Stories travel. The core structure of the story. The vast, ancient-scaled creature that creates and destroys, that guards thresholds, that connects the living world to what lies beneath, is so resonant, so well matched to the underlying neurological template that it takes root wherever it arrives. The specific details adapt to the local ecology. The Chinese dragon controls rain because rain is what matters in a rice farming civilization. The Norse dragon causes earthquakes because earthquakes are what the Norse experienced as the most powerful and uncontrollable geological force. The Mesoamerican feathered serpent carries the attributes of the most sacred local bird because the quetzal is what the feathers mean in that specific ecosystem. The structure persists everywhere. The surface varies by location. The result, across 55 million years of evolutionary pressure, tens of thousands of years of real animal encounters, thousands of years of fossil discovery and geological observation and cross-cultural story exchange, is the dragon. Not one creature. An accumulation, the most sophisticated synthesis of genuine danger that the human imagination has ever produced. The form that real terror takes when it has been processed through every available cognitive system and compressed into a single vivid image that can be transmitted across time. The dragon is not a mistake. It is not a fantasy. It is not the product of ignorance. It is the product of 55 million years of paying close and careful attention to what is trying to kill you, and having the intelligence eventually to give it a name. There is a particular quality to the moment when a scientist realizes that a myth was right, not metaphorically right, not poetically right. Right in the way that a measurement is right, describing a real thing with sufficient accuracy that the description remains useful across enormous spans of time and cultural change. The flood myth was right about the flood. The dragon myth is right about the dragon. The specific details vary. The core truth persists. What does it mean that the dragon persists? What does it say about the human species that this particular image, this vast, scaled, ancient, elemental, lethal composite, has been carried intact across every migration, every civilizational collapse, every catastrophic break in the historical record, every extinction event that wiped out the physical animals that originally inspired it? It means, first, that human memory is deeper than the historical record suggests. The historical record, the written record, the archaeological record, the record that scholars can point to and cite and date, extends back approximately 5,000 years in the most generous interpretations. The dragon tradition extends back 65,000 years in the Aboriginal Australian case, and the neural template on which all dragon traditions rest extends back 55 million years. The historical record is a thin layer on the surface of a depth that the historical record itself cannot see. What is preserved in the deep layers of oral tradition, in the recurring patterns of mythology, in the structural constants of comparative religion? This is not decoration. It is data, ancient data, imprecisely formatted, but data that, when read correctly, describes real things that happen to real people in real places across time spans that dwarf the entire span of recorded civilization. The dragon tradition is proof that the human species can preserve accurate information about real experiences for time spans that no other information storage system, not writing, not stone, not the most sophisticated digital archive, has yet matched. 65,000 years of continuous oral tradition. The memory of a real animal, a real threat, a real ecological relationship, carried forward across more than 3,000 human generations in the minds of people who had no writing, no permanent architecture, no external storage medium of any kind, only stories told by firelight, passed from the old to the young, because the information in the stories was too important to lose. It means, second, that the imagination is not the opposite of reality. The imagination is a tool for processing reality, specifically for processing the aspects of reality that are too large, too ancient, too complex, or too dangerous to be approached directly. The dragon is not what the human imagination produces when it loses contact with the real world. The dragon is what the human imagination produces when it is working at full capacity on the real world, when it is trying to describe the mosasaur skull, and the Komodo dragon, and the burning hillside, and the earthquake, and the ancient fear of serpents that was written into the limbic system before the species existed, all at once, in a form that can be remembered and transmitted and understood. The dragon is science conducted in the only laboratory available to the people who did it, the landscape they lived in, the animals they encountered, the geological events they survived, the ancient fears their brains carried without knowing why. It means, third, that fear is not merely an obstacle to understanding, it is a form of understanding. The dragon fear, the ancient, innate, amygdala-mediated fear of the composite predator, is not irrational. It is the accumulated product of 55 million years of successful risk assessment. The organisms that feared the right things survived. The organisms that failed to fear the right things became the evidence for why the fear was necessary. The fear was the wisdom. The dragon is the shape that wisdom takes when it is ancient enough to have forgotten its own origins. Every culture that looked at the sky and saw a dragon, that looked at the deep water and heard the movement of a vast-scaled body, that looked at the fire coming from the hillside and called it the breath of something ancient and powerful and dangerous. Every one of those cultures was responding appropriately to a real set of real threats. The specific threats varied. The specific forms they took varied. The dragon they produced to contain and transmit the accumulated knowledge of those threats was, in each case, the correct response to the actual conditions of the world they inhabited. The dragon was never a failure of knowledge. The dragon was always the application of knowledge to conditions that knowledge had not yet fully mapped. The application was imprecise. The conclusions were overgeneralized. The creature produced was not literally real in the specific form that any given tradition described it, but the knowledge encoded in the creature, the knowledge that something vast and ancient and scaled and flying is genuinely dangerous, in a way that nothing else is dangerous, the knowledge that certain thresholds should not be crossed without respect and preparation, the knowledge that the deep places of the world contain things that do not respond to human logic. This knowledge was correct. It has always been correct. The entire history of biology and paleontology and evolutionary neuroscience has done nothing except refine and elaborate and provide the technical vocabulary for what the dragon tradition already knew. It means, fourth, that the stories we have dismissed are worth examining again. The flood myth that appears in over 200 cultures was, for centuries, called a religious fantasy. Until the discovery of the Black Sea flood, the Storaga slide, the flooding of the Persian Gulf at the end of the last ice age, the geological record of catastrophic inundation events that affected human populations across multiple continents simultaneously. The stories were right. The evidence was in the ground all along. What other stories are right? What other myths encode real memories of real events, real animals, real geological transformations, waiting for the science that can read them correctly? The giant of mythology, the leviathan of the deep ocean, the race of beings who were here before the current human race. Each of these traditions has its fossil candidates, its evolutionary candidates, its geological candidates. The dragon tradition tells us that the appropriate response to an ancient story is not dismissal. The appropriate response is the question, what real thing is this story describing? The dragon has been described as a monster. It has been described as a god. It has been described as a demon, a spirit, a cosmic principle, a primordial force, a divine ancestor, an enemy of civilization, the foundation of civilization, the guardian of its boundaries, the destroyer of its pretensions. It has been slain by heroes and worshipped by emperors and ground to powder and sold as medicine and painted on cave walls and carved into the foundations of temples and stitched onto the robes of dynasties and tattooed onto the bodies of warriors and woven into the flags of nations. All of these descriptions are true because all of them are pointing at the same thing from different angles. The dragon is the form that real danger takes when the human mind has had enough time and enough experience to understand the danger completely. It is not one fear, it is the convergence of all fear, the summation of everything that has tried to kill the human species across the full span of its existence, assembled into a single image that can hold all of it simultaneously and transmitted intact across any distance of time or culture. The cultures that feared the dragon were not ignorant. They were informed. They had been informed by the oldest and most comprehensive threat assessment system in the history of life on this planet. The primate nervous system, refined by 55 million years of surviving things that were faster and stronger and more patient than the primates themselves. The dragon fear was the output of that system, running correctly, producing the accurate warning. The thing you should be most afraid of is not any single animal. It is the category of animal, vast, scaled, ancient, elemental, patient, and lethal, in ways that no single defensive strategy can address. This is the reason the dragon guards thresholds. The threshold is not a metaphor. The threshold is the real boundary between the known and the unknown, between the landscape that human experience has mapped and the landscape that human experience has not yet reached. The dragon is not at the threshold arbitrary. The dragon is at the threshold, because the threshold is where the danger is. Where human knowledge ends is precisely where the old threats begin. The cave the dragon guards is real. The deep ocean the sea serpent inhabits is real. The volcanic underworld the fire-breathing monster emerges from is real. The dragon is stationed at these places, not because mythology is dramatic, but because experience taught every culture that these places required the maximum possible warning. The dragon is the oldest safety system in the world, the oldest teacher, the creature that humanity invented, or remembered, which amounts to the same thing, to pass on the knowledge of what to be afraid of across any span of time, to any descendant, in any language, in any culture, anywhere on the planet where the human species has managed to survive. The world is full of things that could kill a person. Not many of them require a dragon to communicate their danger. The tiger requires only the word tiger. The plague requires the word plague. The flood, the drought, the winter that comes too early. All of these can be communicated in ordinary language, passed from parent to child in the course of daily life, and the warning arrives intact. The dragon is reserved for the things that ordinary language cannot hold. The things that are not merely dangerous but categorically dangerous. The things that killed people before the people had words for them, before the people had the cognitive architecture to form deliberate thoughts about danger, before the people were the kind of beings who could think about being killed rather than simply being killed. The dragon is the warning about the things that were dangerous before we were human. It has been carrying that warning for 55 million years. The warning is still valid. There are things in this world that are too large to be seen clearly. Not because they are hidden, because they are everywhere, because they are the size of the world itself, and you cannot see the size of the world from inside it. The dragon is one of these things. It is in every ancient text, every temple carving, every cave painting, every dream, every child's drawing that no one taught, and every nightmare that arrives with the absolute certainty of an old memory. It is in the neural architecture of a brain shaped by 55 million years of surviving things that were larger and colder and more patient than the people who survived them. It is in the bones eroding from desert cliffs and coastal bluffs and the riverbeds of ancient China. It is in the burning hillside in Turkey, where the gas seeps have never stopped, and the fire the ancient Greeks attributed to a monster is still burning. It is in the salt water that was the world before the world had its current form, in the depth of the ocean where the pressure is sufficient to crush a modern submarine and where the largest animals that currently exist look small against what the fossil record says was there. The dragon is the longest story the human species has ever told. It began before human beings were human beings. It will not end before human beings have ceased to be. The next time someone says that dragons are not real, that they are fantasy, that they are the product of ignorance, that they are the stories of people who did not know better, the answer is available. The fossil record says otherwise. The evolutionary neuroscience says otherwise. The living biology of monitor lizards and anacondas and great eagles says otherwise. 65,000 years of unbroken Australian oral tradition says otherwise. The discovery that the Babylonian creation epic and the Mesoamerican creation epic and the Aboriginal Dreamtime and the Norse cosmology and the Hindu cosmology all independently produce the same vast-scaled ancient creature without any contact between them says otherwise. Dragons are real, not in the specific form that any one tradition described them. Real, in the only way that matters, they describe something true about the world. They describe the accumulated danger of 55 million years of primate evolution. They describe the largest animals that ever lived. They describe the geological forces that shaped every landscape the human species has ever inhabited. They describe the fear that the primate brain has carried since before it was a human brain, the fear that is still there, in the architecture of the amygdala, in the response that is faster than thought. The dragon is the most honest creature the human imagination has ever produced. It looks like fantasy. It is the most rigorous truth the species has ever told about itself, about what hunted it, what shaped it, what it remembers from before it had words for memory, and what it will carry forward into whatever comes next. What the dragon says about the other great stories, the lost cities, the great floods, the beings who were here before the current human race, the golden ages and the catastrophes, and the long memories of civilizations that should not have existed, is a question this channel will be sitting with for a very long time. This is obscure narrative. Dig deeper. The truth is always more interesting.